Okay, this one we're continuing on with economic growth. Today we're looking at a topic that really seems to throw a few people out, aggregate supply. Now we go back to when we discussed basic supply and demand. Everybody seemed to have a reasonable good understanding of demand, and supply tends to throw a few people out, and now we're looking at aggregate supply, where you're going to look at a very, very strange and new and ugly graph. But if we break it down and look at it, it is reasonably simple to understand. Okay, so what is aggregate supply? Well, it's the total value of Australia's output that firms are willing and able to supply. Okay, and the AS curve demonstrates the amounts of suppliers are willing to supply at different price levels. And we know that from a normal curve anyway, normal supply curve. Whatever the price is, that's what suppliers will supply at. And naturally they want to supply at a high price because they want to increase their profits. Okay, when we look, now usually we've looked at normal straight line curves. When we look at an aggregate supply curve, you'll notice it is considerably different. And it is broken into three sections. That is an aggregate supply curve with three specific little sections. Okay, so our vertical axis over here is our general price level, and our horizontal axis is real GDP. So here's our first area here, this horizontal section. So this horizontal section here is, we've got excess capacity, we've got high unemployment. There are high levels of unemployment, resources are not being used effectively. Now don't get caught up with the fact that, hang on a second, real GDP is going up, because even in this section we can increase quantity produced, but price doesn't necessarily go up. Okay, so we then move into this area here, and we'll call this the intermediate zone, the nice curve here. And we've got more people being employed, and also we can see, because of general price level over here, the general prices are starting to rise. So this is an area, this is a good area, and if you think about it in the business circle, this is starting to our expansion area. More people being employed, prices are going up, we've got a limited excess capacity, and this is pretty much our ideal level. This is where we want to be. Okay? And then we have this nice vertical area here, nice straight up line. So what are we looking at there? Well, there's no excess capacity. We're looking at full employment. There's no unused capacity. Everything is being used. So all resources are being fully utilised, whether they be labour resources or whether they be land resources or whatever. There's no one else to employ. All machines are fully used, and businesses cannot increase supply. They can only increase prices. So they are at full productive capacity. So therefore, if demand is still up, we know that the only thing that can happen is prices are going up. We cannot increase supply whatsoever. The only thing that will happen is, if there's still demand for our product, we'll just stick the price up. We can't make any more. Okay? So that's what an aggregate supply graph is. In a couple of slides I'll show you, mix it with an aggregate demand graph, and we'll see how ugly it sort of starts to look. But if you break it down to these areas, okay, so here we're looking at high unemployment, so we can increase capacity. Remember, we can increase production, but we can't increase our prices. Here is our ideal level. This is the expansion part of a business cycle, and here we cannot produce anymore. Everything is at full utilisation. Okay? And that's all these say. Pretty much what I've just said. The horizontal section, intermediate zone, and the vertical section. Business cannot increase supply, they can increase prices. And at this point, because prices are going up, we have high inflation. Okay, the next graph. Aggregate demand versus aggregate supply. So what do we have here? We've got our inflation rate over here on this side. We've got our real GDP, and we've got this little symbol here, YFE, and we'll call that full employment. Okay, that's where our full employment. Now also going back, we haven't discussed it yet, but going back to last year when we discussed inflation, remember we've always discussed that the target inflation rate, this is this area in here, of the government and the Reserve Bank is 2 to 3%. Economic growth we've discussed, their target is 3 to 4%, but inflation rate, they know 2 to 3%. You're going to get some bit. We want some sort of inflation because that shows the economy is growing, wages are going up, people are, their earning capacity is increasing, things like that. So while you're reading the newspapers, oh, inflation, and most people consider inflation to be bad, we know as economists that inflation in this range is actually a good thing for the economy, providing, of course, we are achieving that 3 to 4% growth here in economic growth. If inflation is in this range now, economic growth is down here, then it's bad. Okay, so inflation in that area is bad and kind. Righto? So again, here's our aggregate supply growth. Now we're adding in an aggregate demand curve, and you can see they meet in that area. That's what we're looking at. Okay, so if demand and supply can meet in that area, we're sitting in our target inflation rate. Everybody's a happy little camper. Okay, we're all happy little bananas. So, what are we looking at here? Well, the vertical axis represents the inflation, as we said. Horizontal is real GDP. Remember, in real, the difference between real and nominal is the inflation. We've removed inflation from real GDP. We've got our target inflation rate, and this is where the RBA and everybody wants to be. Rates above this, up here, rates above our target inflation, they're undesirable. Well, for a number of reasons. It shows prices are going up, and if they're going up, and even if we're achieving 3 to 4% in economic growth, and yet our inflation rate is 6%, inflation is going up higher than economic growth. This is a bad thing, bad and kind. Okay. The other thing is, if we've got inflation rate going up, well, now we may have some of our, and our demand remains the same, we may have some of our local consumers start to look overseas at cheaper prices because they may not have our inflation rates. So high inflation rates can be bad for local producers. Okay, so now we're going to our AS curve. As the curve starts to slope up here, this point right here, it shows the economy is it's reaching its productive capacity. Okay? Ooh, go back to a minute and do that. This puts pressure on the price of resources. So if we can't produce any more, but we still need our resources, price of resources is going to go up. As the curve becomes completely vertical, supply has reached its current capacity and simply cannot increase. The only way it can increase is if we add more resources or through some sort of efficiency, technical efficiency, which we've discussed previously. See how everything is now starting to tie all in. We can move this through efficiency, but at this point we're stuck right here. Okay? Right. If there is an increase in demand, let's say for example the demand curve decides to change, and we have a new demand curve, well, that's going to result in higher inflation. So if demand stays the same and we can sit in this point, we're happy. But if demand changes, all of a sudden it meets our supply curve here. This is our new equilibrium point. Okay, when you run it across, inflation is starting to occur here. So we've got to be real careful. Aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay, it's an ugly looking graph. This is a pretty short one. It's an ugly looking graph, but know how to construct an aggregate supply curve, and also have a look at this, the relationship between aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and target inflation rates. And remember, we can also put another line through here at about 4% for our target economic growth rate. Know this relationship. Okay, this is a pretty quick and easy one.